Hi there, welcome to Key Area 6 Respiration of Unit 1 of the National 5 Biology course. This is the last key area, so we're most of the way through it. I'd say it's probably the hardest unit that we're working our way through at the moment. So if you're doing not too badly right now, you should be quite pleased with yourself overall. So we're nearly done it. I'd say it's not the one with the least stuff to learn. Multicellular organisms probably has a lot more content to it, but I'd say in terms of challenging concepts, we are pretty much through those. So that's looking good. So we're going to work through respiration, three main things in respiration: ATP, aerobic respiration, and fermentation.
So, as usual, this is from the SQA course specification. This is all of the things you need to know. You will notice it's a biggie. There are lots of things there. So, yeah, this is going to be two videos?
Two videos, yep.
Two videos, yep. We're going to cover most of it actually in this first one. But yeah, a lot of information. This one might be one you want to watch a couple of times just to really get your head around it.
It's something that people do tend to struggle with.
Okay, so in this particular video, we're going to look at the first two. We are not going to be looking at the bottom one. We're going to be looking at what respiration is and why we need it. We're going to look at the uses of ATP, and we're going to look at aerobic respiration. So the first three. We're not going to look at fermentation in this. That's going to be in the next video.
Okay, so here what we're going to do is we're going to cover the uses of ATP and how it is generated. Now, ATP should sound vaguely familiar. We did mention it very, very briefly in our transport across cell membranes topic when talking about active transport. Active transport requires energy / ATP. There's other processes that also need ATP, so we're looking at where exactly does the ATP come from, because you don't eat it, you don't drink it, so it must be generated inside our bodies, and we'll be looking at how that exactly happens. So things that we will be looking to be able to do is name the molecule that transfers energy throughout the cell, state the 5 uses of ATP within cells, very important within cells, describe the main stages of aerobic respiration, probably the hardest bit in this topic, and state the location of the 2 stages of aerobic respiration.
Okay, so just to recap on stuff we've already discussed. So this first point, going back to the first key area we talked about cell structure. So the mitochondrion, if it's one, mitochondria, if there's more than one, this is the site of aerobic respiration. So when oxygen is present and respiration is happening, this is where it's going to be. But we're going to touch on that more. Glucose, the idea that glucose is a sugar and a source of chemical energy. Remember, anything ending in OSE, that means it's probably 99.9% of the time in biology going to be a sugar. And then crucially, what enzymes do. So remember, enzymes control different reactions, respiration being one of them, and enzymes that are affected by temperature and that idea of denaturing. That's a really, really crucial idea. We'll get onto it more, but if you think about it, if there's a reaction that's controlled by enzymes, and then the temperature gets too high and the enzymes become denatured, the enzymes can no longer do the job. What's going to happen to that reaction? But have a think about that and we'll get onto that.
Okay, so what is respiration? Now, respiration is the name for a series of chemical reactions that happen inside our body where we take chemical energy and we convert it into useful energy. Now, that's the key concept of respiration. It's not about making or producing energy. That is physically impossible. Energy, you should have learned this from S1 and 2 science, energy can only be transferred. So it can be converted into different forms or transferred, but it can't be made or destroyed. Okay, so what we're doing in respiration is we're taking chemical energy and converting it into either more chemical energy or other usable energy formats. Now, its official definition is it is a series of enzyme-controlled reactions that break down glucose to produce ATP. But again, a key concept behind this is the idea is it's a series of reactions that transfer energy.
So this is something you hopefully will have touched on this idea again in S1 and S2 science. You're going to need to click more through this so all the things appear. So obviously, you know, as humans, we breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide. Hopefully you all know that. And also conversely, plants do the opposite. The carbon dioxide we breathe out, they breathe in. And then they breathe out oxygen, and that's the oxygen we breathe in. So that process of our breathing in oxygen and breathing out carbon dioxide is loosely respiration. It's not really respiration, but it's the thing that can allow respiration to occur. So respiration in humans and photosynthesis in plants are basically part of the same cycle that continues constantly between us and what keeps us alive.
Plants also do respiration as well, but I always find this a bit coincidental, this entire thing, that plants are constantly recycling our oxygen not so that we can breathe it in. They're not doing it for us. They don't give a toss about us. But they're constantly producing this gas that we need, and we are constantly producing gas that they need. I quite like that. Okay, so let's have a look at ATP in a bit more detail. Now, I promised you that in the transport across membranes topic that we would go into more detail of ATP. This is where we go into that detail here. So we'll explain ATP. ATP features in Unit 3 when we look at photosynthesis again very briefly, but here is where you're supposed to learn about what it is. Now, the stuff that's underlined is the definition of ATP that you need to be able to give in the exam. So it's a molecule that can transfer energy from one part of a cell to another. Now, loads of cell processes need energy. Obviously, osmosis and diffusion do not need energy, but there's quite a few others that do. We'll have a look at them on the next slide. ATP is what provides this energy, okay? So if we need to do active transport, ATP is giving the energy, allowing active transport. Without ATP, there'd be no energy and there'd be no active transport. I like to think of it like it's the money for cells. It's the currency. If anything needs energy, it needs ATP. So you've got to have a certain amount of ATP available in order to do essential things, which we'll look at on the next slide. Now, that concept of transferring energy, very important, because we have basically two sites in the cell where energy will be converted into ATP. And the idea is we want the ATP then to be able to go and give energy to other parts of the cell. Okay, and that's very important. If energy is created in a useful form, I'm not going to say created because that can't happen, but if it's turned into a useful form in one area of the cell, it needs to be able to get anywhere in the cell in order to be used.
Okay, so in terms of the uses of ATP, there are 5 main uses you need to know. And quite often in the exam there is a question that will say, other than this one and this one, name 2 other processes. So this actually is a case, learning all 5 is best. 4 you might be fine, but try and learn all 5. So processes that require ATP. Active transport, you have already touched on that. We've discussed it in this video. There's a previous video on it as well. So active transport definitely requires it. Muscle cell contraction. So not muscles contracting, but muscle cell contraction. Really, really important you put that word cell in there or else that would be incorrect. Cell division, which is a process we will look at in multicellular in that topic. Protein synthesis, again, we've already looked at it. It requires energy. And then transmission of nerve impulses, which again, we will also look at that in multicellular organisms. But these are your 5 main uses of ATP. These are put it on flashcards and learn all of these. And then without ATP, these processes would not happen. And if these processes aren't happening, the cells would be dying and ultimately you would be dying. If these things aren't happening, you're not going to be living very long. So ATP is crucial to survival in life.
Now, we're going to have a look at the first process, the main process in humans and animals and most plants that generates ATP, because it's such an essential molecule, we need a constant supply of it. And the first process that generates it is called aerobic respiration. It's the main process, it produces the largest amount of ATP, and it's also the reason why we need to constantly breathe. Every time I ask my class, why do we breathe? The answer is because we'll die. Now, aerobic respiration is the reason why we die without oxygen. Because without oxygen, no aerobic respiration. Without aerobic respiration, far less ATP / running out of ATP, and that's where cells start to die, because they run out of ATP, not because they run out of oxygen.
And don't be alarmed by that diagram in the last slide. You don't need to know it. It is a far more complex one than you will need to do. It is a little bit of the higher stuff. It was just a diagram with the name on it, basically.
It's just a pretty picture that I wanted to put in that had that word.
So basically, aerobic respiration, it is, first of all, is a series of chemical reactions. You do need to know that. It is one chemical reaction happening after another. And it is, the process of it is glucose is broken down through these series of chemical reactions, and then energy is released and captured to create ATP. So keeping that energy in that form of ATP. And really importantly is aerobic respiration requires oxygen to be there. So if there is no oxygen, something else happens. We will talk about that in the next video. But it's really important that you know is aerobic respiration is in conditions where there is oxygen available.
Without oxygen, aerobic respiration cannot occur. I like to think of like aerobic exercise is the kind of exercise where you're breathing a lot, you're using your lungs quite a lot, and then I connect it to aerobic respiration. Now, this is the whole of step 1 of aerobic respiration. There are 2 steps to it, okay, or 2 main steps to it. Step 1 is what we've got is the location that this is happening in is the cytoplasm. So we've got the redrawing of the cell. Cytoplasm, remember, is pointing at that empty space in the middle, but what it's talking about is just basically the background of the cell containing all the cell organelles. Okay, and what happens is glucose, which maybe you've eaten a high carbohydrate meal or something like that, has diffused into the cell, okay, using diffusion, and it starts to get broken down into this molecule here. Now that's called pyruvate, and it's broken down into 2 of these molecules of pyruvate. Pyruvate's got 3 carbons in it. Glucose has got 6 carbons in it. I like to think like a massive chef's knife has just come down and split it in 2, and then you end up with 2 molecules, each of 3 carbons each. Now, this wee side arrow at the side in red, that is showing another thing being created called 2-ATP. Okay, now that number 2-ATP is important, but the arrow and the fact that it's not joining into the reactions is significant. The idea is ATP is basically just showing the energy being captured, so it's swooping in, capturing that energy and using that to form 2 molecules of ATP. It's not like it's an ingredient that's thrown in with glucose in order to cause the reaction. Okay, so ATP doesn't live in the main guts of the reaction. Instead, it's that little curly side arrow. If you're in doubt, say you get a picture in an exam and it's a little curly arrow and it's got an X at the end and they're saying what is part X going to be, chances are it's going to be ATP. If it's a curly arrow, most likely it's going to be ATP. So summary of step 1, glucose broken down into 2 pyruvate, 2 ATP are produced.
The second step, this can only happen when oxygen is available. So step 1, it doesn't need oxygen. Step 1 can happen whether oxygen is available or not. If oxygen is not available, again, we're going to look at that in the next video. But when oxygen is available, it goes into this stage in which those 2 pyruvate are then broken down into carbon dioxide and water. Now, it's useful to also know carbon dioxide might be written as CO2, water might be written as H2O. You need to be able to use them interchangeably. Either of them could appear in their exam. But that's it. So 2 ATP broken down into carbon dioxide and water. And again,
2 pyruvate.
2 pyruvate is broken down into carbon dioxide and water. And at that time, we've got another one of these kind of swooping arrows showing that many ATP are made. Now, it's not a number this time. There's not a specific number you need to know. At this point, it is just many or lots of ATP. The idea you need to know is step 1, there's 2 ATP made. In the step 2, lots more ATP is made. You might get a question and it says which stage is there more ATP being made. It's the second stage of aerobic respiration, and all of this is occurring in the mitochondria. So if you remember your definition of what a mitochondria is, it's the site of aerobic respiration. So when that oxygen is available and we're on to this step 2 of it, that's where it's happening.
Okay, now this is just the last 2 pictures that you've seen, but in words. You might get asked in an exam to do either. So they might show you a picture of stage 1 or stage 2, or both stage 1 and stage 2 mixed together, and say what is part X, what is part Y, what is product or substrate X or Y. Or there might just be a simple sentence saying describe aerobic respiration, and this is what the answer would be. So it's step 1, in the cytoplasm, the location. Glucose is broken down into 2 pyruvate. Enough energy is released to make 2 molecules of ATP. So that's the whole of step 1. Step 2, oxygen must be present. Aerobic respiration occurs in the mitochondria, or it's finished in the mitochondria. 2 pyruvate molecules from stage 1 are broken down to carbon dioxide, and this releases enough energy to create many ATP. So all that this slide is just a word description of the last 2 picture slides that you have seen. You need to be able to do either for this. Some of you might find it easier to remember the words, some of you might find it easier to remember the pictures. Ideally, you want both skills, but if you are struggling with this topic because it is hard, it might be worth your time just sort of ignoring the pictures and just focusing on this, because I think that these 5 sentences are easier to remember than the pictures that you've seen previously. A lot of people struggle with the images that's in there. There are lots and lots of past paper questions on aerobic respiration. I would really advise that you look at them because it never appears the same way twice as a picture. Is they've always drawn it differently. They always miss parts out or include bits that they never have done before. Sometimes it's going up and down, like starting with glucose, then pyruvate, then carbon dioxide and water. Sometimes it's going across the way, so glucose, pyruvate, carbon dioxide and water. So you got to get used to this idea that they might present it in any kind of way.
Sometimes it's in a wheel as
well.
That's
delightful.
That's quite a common one with arrows going in and arrows coming out. So arrows going in are obviously your things going in, arrows coming out are the things ultimately being produced, so your carbon dioxide and water. And guaranteed, whatever website you're on or whatever teacher you have, it will be done differently. It is always done differently, but that is good because it will allow you to get more comfortable with actually understanding what is going on. But yeah, if you can learn these words and you know this goes in, this goes in, this is broken down, this is produced, it means you should be able to look at a diagram and figure out based on arrows pointing in, arrows pointing out what is going on.
What should be going in, what should be coming out.
Okay, the role of enzymes in this, obviously enzymes, super crucial in biology. We talk about them loads, they're really important. The process of aerobic respiration is controlled by enzymes. So without enzymes, it's not going to happen. So this means aerobic respiration can be affected by temperature and pH because enzymes are affected by temperature and pH, like we talked about in our video all about that. If you forgot that, go back and watch that video. So remember, low and high temperatures can then change the effect, or can have an effect on the rate of respiration. If it's really, really low temperatures, those enzymes are going to be working a lot slower, so their activity is going to be low. So the reaction is going to be happening less quickly than it would usually be. Whereas if the temperature is really, really high, those enzymes, or pH similarly is really high, these enzymes are then going to become denatured. So low or high pH, they can become denatured. High temperature, they can become denatured. If that happens, if those enzymes are denatured, those enzymes are not working. They are no longer doing their job. There is no enzyme activity. If there is no enzyme activity, there is no aerobic respiration. You're dead. It's the easiest way to think of it. If these enzymes aren't working, aerobic respiration is not happening. Death is coming quickly. It's sad, but that's kind of the way to think about enzymes. If enzymes aren't there, death is coming and death is happening. And that is an idea they like to talk about a lot, is they'll say, here's this reaction. What happens if we up the temperature 10 degrees? And you need to think, right, enzymes are past their optimum, becoming denatured. Bad things. That's
the thing that crops up most often, is they say, right, we are investigating, here's an experiment where we look at the effect of, we're investigating respiration in yeast, or we're investigating respiration in germinating peas or woodlice. And then they say, predict what would happen if we drop the temperature by 10 degrees or if we increase the temperature by 10 degrees. Your answer always has to be about enzymes being more or less active or denaturing. It's not about working faster or slower. It's going to be about more or less active enzymes. And that's a crucial language point to have there. All right, let's summarize then. So key terms. Again, if you're doing flashcards, these would be a good idea. Respiration is a series of reactions breaking down glucose to release energy.
ATP is a molecule made during respiration that transfers energy to where it is needed in a cell.
Aerobic respiration, step 1, glucose is broken down to pyruvate to make 2 ATP.
Aerobic respiration, step 2, oxygen is absolutely necessary for this. It is when pyruvate is broken down to carbon dioxide and water, and many ATP are made.
And then respiration enzymes, they are the things that are controlling the reactions during respiration, and they are affected by both pH and temperature, meaning that respiration can be affected by pH and temperature. And that's it. Okay, so that's it for ATP and aerobic respiration. So the molecule that transfers energy throughout the cell, test.
ATP.
Okay.
I thought you called me test there.
No, I said test, not test. Oh, you know.
Strictly Come Dancing.
State 5 uses of ATP within the cells. Go.
Muscle contraction, muscle cell contraction, nerve impulses, active transport, protein synthesis, and I've said these in a stupid order because now I've forgotten what 4 I've said. Cell division is the other one.
There we go.
It's hard to remember all 5 when you don't do them in a sensible order.
I'm going for cramped T with a T at the end. Cramp and then T.
Cramped T. Okay.
Describe the main stages of aerobic respiration.
So the main stages, it starts with glucose. Glucose is then broken down into 2 pyruvate, and at the same time your 2 ATPs coming in your little swirly arrow saying that their 2 ATP is being produced and transferring energy. and then when oxygen is available, we are now suddenly into the mitochondria, and at this point our 2-pyruvate is being broken down into carbon dioxide and water, and many ATP are being produced.
Well done. Okay, and finally, where's the location of stage 1 of aerobic respiration?
It's in the cytoplasm.
Stage 2
is in the mitochondria.
Okay, so that's it. Next video will be fermentation, and then that will be us finished Unit 1, finally.